Hello and welcome to Life's Booming Series 5 of this most excellent and award-winning podcast. I'm James Valentine, and in this series we're going to ask the question, is this normal? I mean, as we age, stuff happens to us. Our bodies change, things fall off, we get crook, stuff doesn't work as well as it used to. There's nothing we can do about it. We're getting older, we're aging. But which bits are normal? Which bits do we have no control over? Which bits can we do something about? That's the kind of questions that we're going to be asking in this series, Is This Normal?, of Life's Booming. Now, of course, if you enjoy this series, leave us a review, tell all your families and friends about it. And we want to hear from you as well. You can contribute to this. If you've got questions about things in particular that you want to know, perhaps there's some particular wear and tear happening to you, let us know. We'd love to see if we can answer that question in the series. We're going to look at things like menopause, gut health, mental health, lots of other burning questions. So think about those areas, and if there's something in there that's specific to you that you'd like us to cover, let us know. When it comes to women's health in older years, it turns out that the hot flushes, the brain fog, the facial hair, the mood swings can all be linked back to the one thing, and that's menopause. In this episode, Menopause, the Other Side. Let's take a look in some detail at the common symptoms, the experiences, and life on the other side of it. We'll get some answers about menopause, the M word from the Queen of Morning Television, Dr. Ginni Mansberg. But it gives me great pleasure to welcome, of course, to this podcast as well, Jean Kittson, who wrote a fantastic book called You're Still Hot to Me, dealing with her experience and her research into menopause. Jean Kittson, hello.
Hello, James.
Still so hot?
Yes, I am actually. Every now and then.
Is this the 10th anniversary? Is it 10 years since you published?
Yes, it is. 2014 it came out. It's into its 6th reprint now, something like that. Women still keep going through menopause.
The book didn't fix it?
No, that's right. And I thought I'd finish. Everyone's finished.
Yeah.
No, they're still going. They're still, of course, they're still experiencing menopause. And just the other night, I was out with some younger women, and they're still struggling, trying to work out what the best way to handle it is, and what treatment to get. And there's still people pushing back around different treatments like HRT. I was really surprised. We've come on a lot more than we have 10 years ago. People are speaking about it, but there's still a lot of ignorance, really, misinformation.
It still seems to be an area of mystery, really, so and you know, half-whispered truths. Oh, well, I've heard you should do this, and what about the other?
Yes, I think people are still afraid it's going to impact on their work, because there was the Australian Human Resources Institute did a survey, and they found that the majority of women would not mention menopause at work because they thought they'd be considered old, sidelined for leadership positions. Yeah, just with all the stigma still attached to menopausal women. So there's still a lot of, I don't want to talk about it in the workplace. And that, of course, translates to I don't really want to talk about it at all.
Yeah, and leading into it, you know, let's say you're 30 or 40, you're not even thinking about it.
No, well, that's the thing. And yet when I was doing my book, I found that most of the women I randomly chose to interview were having their first hot flushes around 40, 42. And we're always told it's around 50, 52, 55, that area. But many, many women will start going through perimenopause, which is another part of menopause that I didn't even know existed until I went through menopause. So there's perimenopause that can start 10 years earlier, and some women are thinking, you know, they follow the Hollywood style, I'll have a baby. She had a baby naturally at 50, so can I. I'll just keep putting it off. What was that, a hot flush? What the hell? What am I going to do? You know, so it comes as a terrible shock. And I think there's a lot of things about women's bodies that need to be talked about more openly. Our fertility, ovulation, you know, menopause, all those sort of things.
Yeah. If only it happened to men.
If only we'd never hear the end of it.
That's right. We'd have championships in it.
Yeah, that's right.
Set world records, all that sort of stuff.
You'd have, months off.
Yeah, exactly.
Menopause month off.
Do you know, he's battling with menopause, but still CEO. What a guy.
That's right. Hang on, you can't talk to him for a moment.
That's right, just wait.
All the windows are open.
He's a little bit emotional, but come back tomorrow. He'll be fine.
We were going to have a board meeting. It's cancelled.
But don't worry about
menopause.
it.
What?
Oh, that's fine. No worries. I understand. I went through it myself, man. On you go. Good on you, chaps. Is it as simple as, like, it was happening to you and you found it difficult to find relevant information, what you needed to know?
Oh, yeah. That's why I wrote my book.
Yeah.
I wrote the book I needed. I needed to find the facts out about menopause, and I found out so many other facts about my own body that had never been talked about. We're just sort of more primed. Our whole bodies are primed to have sex when we ovulate rather than other times of the month, but we're told that women are just ready for it every day of the freaking week.
Yeah, and let me clarify that. That was men who decided that one?
Can't say it ain't so. Because men don't understand women and don't like it when we get a little bit feisty, a little bit irritable, start giving our kids a burnt chop. You know, in the old days, we were diagnosed with climacteric insanity and locked up. And if men of a certain age got a little bit feisty, a little bit irritable, they were elected to Parliament.
That's right. It's very good. Dr. Ginni Mansberg's with us. You've met.
Yes, we have. Ginny, hello.
Hello, darling. How are you? Hello to both of you.
Thank you so much for coming in. Is this, like, I think what we've got to is, like, I'm sort of seeing we shouldn't necessarily think about all these things as separate. It's the entire cycle of life and the entire fertility cycle of a woman that we should be discussing, not as though there's this thing that happens to people called menopause.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people don't realise that menopause itself is a single day that happens 12 months from the first day of your last period, only you probably didn't know it was your last period at the time because your periods were all over the show, often for up to several years before you go into menopause proper. And we call that perimenopause. I call it hormone hell. Your hormones are giving you a triple pike with a half flip because they are going up and down like a yo-yo. And our brains and our bodies really don't like those fluctuating hormone levels. So often, exactly as Jean was saying, the worst of it comes in your mid to late 40s, not in your late 50s. That's not it at all. In fact, sometimes life gets a lot better on the other side of the rainbow after menopause.
Hang on, just take me back. You said a single day. Menopause is a single event.
It is. So it's defined as 12 months from your last period. That's really problematic for women who, for example, have a hysterectomy before they go into menopause. It doesn't make any sense for those women whatsoever because their hysterectomy might have been at age 40, their ovaries were fully functional and don't go into decline for another 6 years. That's a problem. For women who use contraceptives that, like the Mirena coil, that have some progesterone in their coil, they don't have regular periods either. So there is a movement to change that definition, but that's what we've got at the moment, that single day, 12 months after you had your last period.
Yet we describe it, Jean, as it seems to me like as anything from about 45 to 75, a whole period of life.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I haven't heard the single day definition before, I must say, but of course it is 12 months after your last period. So if you can counter the day, that's the day you are officially and probably, medically, scientifically in menopause.
What happens on that day?
You buy a bottle of champagne. And
Ginny, what happens on that day?
Mostly, it's not a lot different from the perimenopause that precedes it and those early postmenopausal years. That's why I think getting hung up on definitions is problematic from a medical perspective. It's not like once you hit menopause on that day, everything changes. It's not like that at all. In fact, the treatment is fairly similar whether you've gone through menopause already or whether you're in that lead up, but your hormones are still giving you hormone health.
Jean, when you were looking at this, did you find a treatment for menopause?
Well, when I started going through menopause, I was asking around my friends, what's going on, and they said, it's probably menopause, and most of them didn't take any treatments, and they said it was a breeze for them, or they didn't really like to talk about it. Some of my friends said, I'm on HRT. Other people were saying HRT's, is deadly. You'll get breast cancer. It was during that time. It wasn't long after the Women's Health Institute brought out the report that linked HRT to breast cancer, and everyone dropped off using it. But then it was found 12 years later to be flawed, and HRT is the best way to go. So I had to keep being a fully functioning woman. I had kids at home, elderly parents. I was full-time job. I couldn't stand on stage and start perspiring and mopping my brow, and that's the first time I had a hot flash. I was talking to all these young tech guys from Ericsson or something. It was a corporate gig, and I'm standing on stage in a silk top, gold silk top, and then I'm going, is it hot in here? That's probably the first time I mentioned that, out of the million times I've mentioned it since. And I started mopping my brow, and then I looked down and my whole top had turned like camouflage. I had rings of sweat under my boobs. I had them down the side. And then I thought, I have to do something radical about this. So I went to a gynecologist. I talked about HRT. I realised there was a lot of fear that a lot of women suffered. A lot of women would leave their jobs because they thought they weren't coping with work, but they actually weren't coping with their menopause symptoms. So a whole lot of, I realized there was, like in so many aspects, women were afraid, they suffered, there were these taboos, they without information, they couldn't lead fully functioning lives, basically. Yeah. And so their biology was in denial. And one of the reasons they denied their biology and didn't talk about it was because when we were burning our bras and things like that, we wanted to be equal to men, the same as men in the workplace. We didn't want to admit that actually there's things that are going to happen biologically that are going to affect our jobs. Not for the worse. We just have to work around it. Like we've got the little kitchen tidies in the toilets now. If in the old days, men would say, don't listen to her, she's on the rags, when we got our period. If you said that now, you'd be considered a fossil and a twerp. So we've got to get the same with menopause. So there's lots of great treatments, but Ginni would know,
Ginni, we might come back to treatments. Let's just discuss the symptoms first of all. Jean's first moment is ghastly. Thank you for repeating it. But the range of symptoms is also extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, everything from palpitations to shortness of breath to itchy skin, a whole lot of stuff that goes on below the belt. Hot flushes is the one that most people know about, and that's because it's really common and very visible. So 75% of women will experience those hot flushes. They're not always dramatic like Jean. Some women just run hotter, and a lot of women experience heat at night, so that interrupts their sleep. We see a lot of insomnia. About 80% of women will experience what we call brain fog. So you can't remember, what's that thing that you write with that leaves ink on the page? Can't remember the name of it. What's that thing that I need to get into the lock of my house? Can't remember that thing. Forgetting people's names, being on a Zoom call and forgetting the name of the project you're working on, that 80% of women will have that. But a lot of people don't realise that this is peak time for mental health issues in a woman's life. So 1 in 3 women will experience some sort of mental health problem. Anxiety and depression are the main ones, and they have particular hues. We often call it, the peri-rage. People are just so angry and so annoyed, and they don't understand why they're so angry with people, but lashing out and acting what they feel like is very inappropriate. They're very remorseful and quite paranoid, very thin-skinned, very easily offended. Now, when you put those things together, it's not surprising, exactly as Jean says, that untreated, 10% of women will leave the workforce altogether. at this time. An additional 14% will decide to go part-time or significantly reduce their hours. An additional 8% of women will either ask for a demotion or actively avoid a promotion, say no to a promotion that's offered to them. And then we can't understand about, number one, the gender pay gap, but number two, the fact that Australasian women retire with so much lower levels of superannuation. And the Australasian Institute of Superannuation Trustees has estimated that for Australian women alone, menopause costs between $17 and $35 billion a year in lost revenue and lost superannuation because they are exiting the workforce because of this hormonal glass ceiling. Now, that doesn't happen to everyone, but I think that those numbers are costing the Australian economy enough and women enough that we need to be taking it more seriously and not just saying it's a couple of hot sweats, suck it up, princess.
Yeah. But I think Jean highlights the difficulty here for many women is that unless the society acknowledges it, unless the entire workforce and all of our structures acknowledge the existence of these things, it's very difficult for an individual woman to suddenly say in the workplace, actually, can we just deal with my menopause? Is that okay? Can we accommodate that now, please?
I think we really need to talk about the study that Jean talked about called the Women's Health Initiative study that came out in 2002. So if you allow me just a couple of minutes to explain what happened and why we are in a bit of a disaster today. So until that study came out around the 1990s, big cohort studies. So when you look at big populations, what scientists had found was that women who were taking the older forms of HRT had lower levels of heart disease. And so the National Institutes of Health in America decided to mount a massive study, 110,000 women, that was a prospective placebo-controlled trial. Don't worry about the details. It's just a really, really good study. And they took women with an average age of 63 who had never had hormone therapy and gave half a placebo and half hormone therapy to look at what would happen to their rates of heart disease and other illnesses. What they didn't expect to find was this. For every 10,000 women who took a placebo, there were 30 cases of breast cancer. But for every 10,000 women who took this old school form of HRT that we no longer use at an average age of 63, when the vast majority of women are well past their symptoms and don't need it anymore, when they started it at that age, there were 38 cases of breast cancer per 10,000 women. The result of that finding was that, and on top of the fact that no, they didn't have any less heart disease, was that they decided to cancel the study. But instead of talking about those relative risks and the fact that this was not in the population that used hormone replacement therapy in real world trials, they went to the papers and said, hey, this stuff causes breast cancer. And a few things happened as a result of that. Number one, 80% of women worldwide threw their HRT in the bin, and all the menopause symptoms got rebranded as just like a wrinkle, like a bit of, if you can't handle that, you're a princess. You shouldn't need this stuff. It's very dangerous. The second thing was, and this is really important, there's a legacy of this today, was that doctors were no longer taught about menopause. It went out of the curriculum. I, with all of my postgraduate experience, have never had any formal education on menopause. Everything I know is self-taught by joining the various menopause societies around the world, because it is not taught to medical students, it's not taught to GPs, it's not taught to gynecologists these days. This is a real problem. There are also still black box warnings that exist today on the newer forms of HRT that women are likely to be prescribed that don't even have that increased risk. In fact, with that study, if you took the subset of women in that 110,000 women study who took the HRT at an average age of between 50 and 60, there was no increased risk of breast cancer. So in the real world, use of that old school HRT, there was no increased risk of breast cancer. But the legacy today means that women are told that it's a shameful thing to ask for any help for it. You shouldn't need it because the treatment is dangerous. It makes women think that getting treatment for it is putting their own lives at risk. And it also means that doctors are not skilled up to help women in this situation. And research, there was no research that was done on this topic for decades. That is starting to turn around as women like Jean, who really was a pioneer. In 2014, when her book came out, nobody was talking about it. And she really, really smashed that stigma. We can't thank you enough, Jean. But also as doctors in my generation, the Gen Xers, hit this age group ourselves, we're going, hey, what the hell? what the hell happened to our medical education and how have we let women down so badly, which we have. I think we're turning the corner, but I just wanted to explain the background for why we are where we are now.
That is riveting. And I mean, Jean, I almost don't know what to make of that. You know, Jean, when you say a gynecologist isn't trained in this, a doctor today, you mean a doctor today sitting in medical school, out they come after the end of six years, and at no point did anybody say, right, this term, menopause.
There's a woman called Professor Susan Davis in Melbourne, and she's training doctors in menopause and more women's health. But there wasn't a subset of women's health. And I don't think there ever was one, because I remember this gentleman, he was about 70, coming up to me at a book signing, and he said he was a GP, and he said he trained in the 60s in England, and he said, I'd like to buy your book because he said the only time at medical school that menopause was ever mentioned was we were sitting in a lecture theatre, all men, mainly men, sitting in a lecture theatre, they wheeled a woman into the centre of the lecture theatre, a woman of a certain age, and she was introduced as a menopausal woman, and she looked around and she said, my husband doesn't bother me anymore. And that was... my husband doesn't bother me. So that was their lesson in menopause, that obviously women just go right off sex. That's it, nothing else.
That's the most crucial factor that happens in the whole thing.
Yeah, importantly, what Ginni's saying about the study that linked HRT to breast cancer, there was a new study that came out in 2012, so 10 years later, that explained why it was wrong, and what Ginni was saying. As you get older, you're more likely to get breast cancer anyway. So they were using people into their 70s in this study. But what happened was, when women threw away their HRT, was doctors started prescribing antidepressants to deal with it instead. So we have this huge sort of flood of women on antidepressants because they felt confident with that. They felt if they prescribed HRT and their patient got breast cancer, they could sue. It was all up in the air. There was a lot of fear in the medical world. So now all these women are on antidepressants when what they're experiencing, once again, is what Ginni said, hormonal fluctuations.
Anxiety is more common than depression during the peri and menopausal years. In fact, trigger warning, 1 in 3 women will get this anxiety and depression. It is peak time for anxiety and depression in a woman's life. It's also peak time for suicide in women is 45 to 55, and it's clearly a hormonal thing. And we very rightly in this country focus a lot in postnatal depression, and we don't focus enough on midlife women's depression. What we do see is that if you did have a history of previous hormonal anxiety and depression on the pill, postnatal, it'll almost inevitably come up again during this period, this perimenopausal period. But we see it a lot in women who have never experienced it before, and severe depression. Like, a lot of these women can be hospitalised. What we also know, exactly to what you were saying, Jean, about the use of antidepressant medications, at best, they are about 75% effective, which is better than, nothing. But they do leave 25% of women or people in general who don't respond to them. That level of effectiveness goes down to around about 50% in women who are going through perimenopause and menopause, whereas the hormone replacement therapy is in fact 76% effective. So nothing is 100% effective, but this is clearly a hormonal issue. And if you speak to Professor Jayashri Kulkarni, who is from the Her Centre at Monash University, who is a world leader in menopause and all psychiatric disorders, her first port of call will always be a hormone treatment, and she will only bring an antidepressant medication in if somebody has severe symptoms. For example, they're suicidal, or they can't function, or they literally need to be hospitalised, and that will only be for a short time, and then she gets them off it again and they stay on the hormone replacement therapy. So it's a very different treatment now to what we used to do only 10 years ago, even just when your book came out, Jean.
Jean, I think you highlighted another aspect of this is the time of life at which this occurs. A woman is going to very often have perhaps, teenage children, children moving into adulthood. She might be, starting to go really well in the career. Her parents are now 70 or 80. There's a lot going on at the point at which this hits.
Yes, well, women really are at their peak now in their careers. Once, 100 years ago, the average age of mortality of a woman would die at 57. So you hit menopause, you die. Menopause is the least of your problems. But now we're into our late 80s, mid-80s, late 80s. We've still got a third of our life to live. And we still are working and running a family. And the kids are probably still at home. And we've got our elderly parents, just as you say. So the time of life when menopause hits is really it's a very intense time of life for women. There's so much going on. And you may finally be getting into the position at work where you're feeling really comfortable and you know what you're doing. You have all this knowledge and expertise and understanding, and then suddenly you're battling with something physically that is undermining your ability to manage all these different aspects in your life, and you have to micromanage so much stuff in life. And when you're not getting sleep, I think that's probably one of the worst things, not getting sleep. Then your anxiety and everything, it goes on because you're waking up during the night with these hot flushes or night sweats or whatever you want to call them. That's why you really need to get some proper support. And now we know about, I went on HRT for 10, 12 years. It was fantastic. I couldn't have managed without it. I felt really good. And now there's so much information that it's good for your bowels and your heart and your brain and your, everything, isn't it? Your skin. There's so many things. It actually helps in a woman.
Ginni, is HRT the only treatment? I mean, people will see a range of stuff that's being, sold to them or is available.
Yeah, so there are women who can't have HRT or don't want to. And I think what I'm passionate about, and a lot of doctors now are passionate about, is autonomy of women to have their own choices. And HRT is one choice. And if women choose not to or can't have it because they have a breast cancer which has what we call estrogen receptors on it, then we give them HRT and there's a possibility we can actually make their cancer worse. So not everyone can have it. In that situation, we need to have a range of issues. What I love about HRT is of the 53 symptoms that we've so far identified, everything from palpitations and itchy skin to incontinence and, of course, your hot flushes and your depression. It's the only one that wraps up, I guess, every single symptom and helps every single symptom. That's what's nice about it. However, a lot of women don't even have a lot of symptoms. So what we can do is target your symptoms individually with different medications, and antidepressants is definitely an option, although none of them are as effective as hormone replacement therapy. Because menopause is having a bit of a moment now, but because women are still left with this lingering doubt about the safety and efficacy of hormone treatments, there is a whole raft of products that have come to market promising all sorts of symptom relief, mainly in the supplement space, but also in the tea space, in the wellness powder space, promising a whole lot of things that we have fairly good evidence do not work whatsoever. But once you put an M on it and put a pink bow on the cover, we call it meno-washing. You're going to now charge double for a menopause herbal product than you are for a normal herbal product because women are vulnerable. Plus, we are pretty good consumers. We are generally now, us Gen X women, are prepared to go and buy things for ourselves if we think they're going to contribute to our wellness. So my concern is if you are going to buy one of these menopause products, I would really run it by a doctor who has experience in hormone replacement therapy and other menopause management. A lot of women will get a placebo effect. In fact, in studies, it's up to 75% placebo effect. In my experience, you'll get a good 6 to maybe 12 months out of a placebo effect. But meanwhile, you're getting to the point where, do you remember I talked about the Women's Health Initiative and I told you that the women who started it late ran into problems? That's the best thing that came out of that study. We know if you are over 60 or if it's been more than 10 years since your menopause, you can't start HRT anymore. It confers a very big number of risks for you.
Well, it seems to me, Jean, we started sort of saying, your book is 10 years old, so this is, one of the first volumes and first statements to break through a lot of taboo about it, a lot of non-conversation. You said, look, things are a little better. We've come some way. I'm not feeling that necessarily by the end of this conversation. There seems to me so much further to go. Any one thing you want to happen right now?
I would like women not to just Google menopause, because then they will get so much misinformation. There are really reputable organisations with the correct information, with the facts, and that is places like the Menopause Society that Ginni mentioned, the Jean Hales Foundation. Ginni's probably got a finger on more of them now. I don't go to them, but both those places have the facts. Get the facts, because there's so much misinformation. And it's really controllable. It's a great time of life. If you can get a good sleep and you haven't got the anxiety and you've got control over that, it's wonderful not having to fork out all this money on sanitary products. And you can wear white jeans again. You can go swimming without fear of attracting sharks. It's brilliant. The whole thing is really very, very liberating. But take control over it. Get the right information. Get the facts. Don't just, chat to people and try and get it that way, because there's so much misinformation.
Yeah. Ginni, any one thing you want to see happen right now?
Yes, if you head to the Australasian Menopause Society website and then click on Find a Doctor, you will find a doctor who has a particular interest in menopause and is unlikely to give you the sort of like, you can't have HRT, it's dangerous kind of advice that I'm still hearing every day. Jean and I have made menopause sound absolutely horrendous, which untreated it is. Treated, it is not. Treated, you have a normal life. You do not need to leave the workforce. You do not need to end your marriage. It is peak time for divorce. You don't need to have a fight with your best friend or sister. You can actually have a normal life. And I would urge women not to see this as an inevitable and natural phase of life, so just something to be borne by women, or just seeing it as there's nothing you can do. There is so much we can do for you. Please let us help you and let you get your life back, because you don't need to just put up with it.
Thank you so much. Fabulous conversation. Thank you so much for sharing so much information and experience with us here on Life's Booming.
Thank you, James, for the opportunity to keep talking about menopause. Talk it up.
Thanks, guys.
Well, if you want to know more, you could do no better than to read Jean Kittson's book, You're Still Hot to Me. As we said, it's still out there. It's still a very vital book examining the conditions for menopause in Australia. And Dr. Ginni Mansberg's book is called The M Word, and it's doing the same thing. It's looking at the medical basis, as we keep saying, the facts about menopause. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Season 5, Life's Booming, Is This Normal? Brought to you by Australian Seniors.